The following video was sponsored by the Greek American Heritage Society of Philadelphia, preserving and promoting our community's history.
Our guest today is Temple Professor of Law Marina Angel, a pioneer of civil rights and women's issues, who just recently retired, so we're going to congratulate her. But before we do, and we meet Marina, I'd like to read a short quote about Marina by Thomas Golden. He is the president of the Pennsylvania Bar Association. Professor Marina Angel is a prolific legal scholar who has achieved outstanding professional excellence, distinguishing herself among law school professors and researchers nationwide for her groundbreaking legal scholarship in areas vital to the equal participation of women in society, including legal education, juvenile justice, gender studies, and comparative law. Marina Angel, welcome to Cosmos Philly. Marina Angel, if I can just say it once. Welcome to Cosmos Philly, and congratulations. We found out that you just recently retired from Temple University.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Marina, let's talk a little bit about, first let's talk about your experiences at Temple University. We know that you created a program at Temple, and that's probably what you're most well known for at the school. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, I created that course at a time in the 70s when there was no such course in the United States. And it covered stalking, assault, harassment, and murder. And that was actually a continuum. You found that in many cases.
Did a course like that actually exist outside of Temple University at other locations?
No, it didn't. It does now.
It does now. So that could be considered one of the pioneering efforts, bringing a coursework like that out to the public. Now, with a course like that, was it rebuffed immediately, or how did it come? Was it welcomed immediately in the 70s?
I don't think a lot of my colleagues understood what it was. And it was interesting. My very first class, I had half men and half women. And I looked at the men, and I knew all of them from teaching the first year criminal law course. I said, "What are you doing here?" And they said, "This is really important stuff. We want to work in district attorneys' offices, and a lot of the cases involve violence against women."
Well, besides that class, well, how long actually did the class, it continues today, if I'm correct?
Once I left last year, I think it's been discontinued.
We know that you're a native New Yorker, but you came to Philadelphia based on something that had to do with travel and actually had to do with your culture and your heritage. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Peter Leokouris, who was then the dean of Temple Law School, kept calling up once a year and trying to get me to teach at Temple University, and I kept saying no. And he called up one year and said, "How would you like to teach in Athens for the summer?" And I said, "Yes." So that sucked me in. After that, when he wanted me to come to Temple, I did.
What was that like for you, going to Athens, to the motherland where your ancestry's from?
It was quite fascinating. Many of the students had never been to Greece, even some of the Greek American students. I remember this one scene. We took them to a taverna the second night, sort of to break them into the culture. And this one Greek American boy, there were salads down the middle, grabbed one of the salads. I said, "No, that's for the table." And he said, "No, mine." I had to tell him, "You have to share it." He figured it out after a couple of weeks.
Many news organizations and educational institutions like to come to you for thoughts about contemporary law. Could you tell us about what area of expertise you spoke about, or you're being quoted on often, that was other than what we mentioned, either women's issues? I think it's primarily civil rights.
Some of it was civil rights, but I also taught labor law. And I remember there was a strike down near the airport, and the strikers were gathered on the roof of a building, and they were watching the interview on television. And after it was over, they called me up and said, "Do you think we have a leg to stand on?" I said, "No."
There were two moments, or several moments probably, but two moments that we've talked about briefly before that played pivotal roles in your life. One of them was while you were still in college at Columbia, and you were you worked for the NAACP in the South during the late 60s. How did that affect you, and what did you do down there?
I didn't like the very corporate attitude at Columbia Law School, and I dropped out after the first year. And I ended up getting a call from the Columbia Placement Office, believe it or not, that the NAACP Legal Defense Fund was looking for someone to do a survey on sex-related offenses in two southern states, Virginia and Florida. And they had sent down teams of 2 young men on some of the other states, but the ones for those 2 states were not done well, so I had to redo them.
And the other moment that we briefly talked about, I think, was when you were a small child and you were with your father and you were watching a case unfold on television, Brown versus Brown?
Brown versus Board of Education.
Brown versus Board of Education.
Sunday was our day together. He worked in his dental lab, and then we went to this movie theater that only showed newsreels and cartoons. And then we went to lunch, and he quizzed me on the newsreels to make sure I understood them. And the newsreel was actually a very famous scene of an experiment of 10-year-old black girls who preferred white dolls to black dolls. And I remember the commentators used the term racial self-hatred, and that just stuck with me. It was scary. I don't know if you remember back to the days of Olympic Airlines, all the stewards and stewardesses were blonde, bleach blonde. So Greeks have that racial self-hatred too.
Let's go back to your early life in New York. You grew up, I think you said, around 145th Street, I believe?
And Riverside.
Riverside. What was that like for you? And tell us a little bit about your family ancestry.
145th Street in those days, it was late 40s, early 50s, was a rough neighborhood. I remember at age 12, I knew how to build a zip gun and what a gravity knife was.
You knew how to build a zip gun at age 12? Oh my God. That must have been a rough neighborhood. Why did you know that? I mean, was it something that kids just did?
They were around, yeah.
Wow. And your parents, your father was from Peloponnesos, your mother from Constantinople. Tell us a little bit about them and your relationship.
My father was very into my education. He really cared about it. Now, I wondered if I had a brother, would he have spent as much time on me as he did? But my mother did not understand education. She thought all I needed was a little piano, a little French, and marrying the nearest Greek-American doctor. So she didn't have too many ambitions for me.
Well, your father was once asked, you told me, if he had any children, and he said, "I have one, but she is a lion." I know it brings a big smile to your face. What do you think what did that mean? What was behind that?
I think he knew that I was very curious and very, I don't want to use the word aggressive, tenacious about things, and I really wanted to learn about everything.
And your family had a great influence on you with your cultural background. In fact, I think you've said that your mother would often reflect on Constantinople.
She described Constantinople and also the town on the Sea of Marmara where they went for the summer called Miryafito. I've gone to visit it twice. It's now called Marefti. Turks have changed the names of everything. It really was beautiful. Her description of it was incredible. It's sea, you see some hills in the distance. It's set with hills in back of it.
Tell us a little bit more about your love of the arts and travel, because it seems to me that culturally there's a line there that you draw from your mother, and you've returned. I know you collect a lot of artwork, and you were actually photographed by a very famous Greek photographer named Nelly. Can you talk a little bit about her and your collection of the arts? I think that comes from your father's side, you said.
That comes from my father's side. He supported every out-of-work Greek artist in New York City in the 20s and 30s. And later on, I'll show you a bust of him done by a Greek artist, I don't know who. And also my mother's photograph in the Greek pavilion of the 1939 World's Fair.
Well, we know that Philadelphia, we know that President Leocoris brought you here to Philadelphia. He enticed you with a program that was initiated for you to teach in Athens. Tell us a little bit more about that particular program.
Over the time period, we had 20 to 30 students a year, which means we must have introduced between 500 and 1,000 young prospective lawyers to Greece. And all of the courses were comparative law. I taught a comparative criminal justice course, and my two Greek professors both taught criminal law at the University of Athens. One of them, Anna Benaki, became a leader in New Democracy. It was interesting in terms of I had them come to watch me teach before they taught, and they do not use Socratic method in Greece, even though that's where it started. They just lecture, and in fact, the Greek educational system is absolutely nuts. The teachers take their lecture notes and turn them into a book, which the government buys and gives to the students for free.
Is that still going on today?
Yeah. The students do not bother to come to class because they have the book. And to pass the exams, because they've never paid attention, they go to a frontisterio to learn what they should have been learning for several years. And the exams are oral exams. It's the main professor and two associate professors. And you can tell pretty quickly whether the student knows what they're talking about or not. Also, what I did, which was kind of cheating, but since I directed the program, I could get away with this. I gave my Greek professors the end of the week and the beginning of the week, so I had 5-day weekends to travel. And initially I kept going back to my favorite islands, and I said, you can't do this. You have to at least go to 3 different places every time you're in Greece. So by the time I finished, I had gone to 40 or 50 islands, which is way more than most Greece. And I started doing some of the nearby countries, Bulgaria, the Czech Republic. I think that was about it.
When you did it for 15 years.
Yeah.
And it's quite a length of time. Do you miss it?
No, actually, I was tired of doing the same thing every summer.
Now if you go to Greece, it'll be strictly as a traveler, no teaching.
Yeah.
What about it do you think you got from doing that for 15 years?
It very much broadened your perspective. Greek law is substantially different than American law, so doing comparative law broadens the perspective not only of the students but of the teacher. And you know, I didn't get this so much in Greece as I got it in Japan, but the students would come up with stuff that I didn't expect. It was really different.
Let's move on a little bit here. Some of these students you mentored that became lawyers of the future. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the people that you mentored that are in our community and how that makes you feel, knowing that you were part of that process that brought more, especially women, into the field?
Well, Orania Papadimitriou, who's now a judge, was one of my early students. And I very much adored her father, Father Papadimitriou. He seemed like a kind of simple parish priest, but he was very, very smart, and he knew an awful lot. And sometimes when I went up to Reading, to Antique, I went by the church and then drove him down to Philadelphia. I also had Orania's daughter, Eleni, as one of my students. And I've encouraged other Greek women to go to law school. The Manos girls, I talked to them, and they've both done terrifically.
What do you think you got from the mentoring? What do you think it did for you? Did it enrich you somehow in a way that you weren't expecting?
It was very satisfying. I give lots of unsolicited advice.
Not just to the publications, but you know, you get out there and...
Yeah, and you know, it surprises me sometimes that people remember the unsolicited advice and followed through on it.
Well, you've also been involved with the community, and you're very fond of some of the priests and some of the philanthropic endeavors, the Philoptochos, which your family was involved with. Can you talk or address a little bit about that here locally and how you've been involved?
I think I showed you the picture. My aunt was on the founding board of the National Philoptochos, and my mother was active with the New York Philoptochos. I remember Archbishop Iakovos' big fundraiser every year was a luncheon at the Waldorf Astoria, and it was when I was doing a lot of my civil rights stuff, and he had appeared at the March in Selma. King put out a call for religious leaders to join him, and Iakovos was the only one who showed up. And at a break in the speeches, I went up and congratulated him because I knew he was taking a lot of shit. I mean, I was getting a lot of blame for the stuff I was doing, so I could just imagine what he was doing.
But you were there, is what you're saying.
I wasn't at Selma, but when I was in the South, in Virginia and Florida.
Your paths crossed.
Somewhat.
Are there moments that you can tell us about that you really cherish in your career? Is that a question that you can address maybe through the 60s or through being at Temple? Some specific moments that we kind of recall that were really cherishable, that maybe were enlightening, or something that really drove you forward to continue with the path you were on?
You know, writing articles is really quite tedious. You're sitting by yourself doing research and writing. But my articles all came out of my experience and went into my teaching. So it was, in a sense, payback both ways.
Is there something you're still curious about now after all these years in your field or in your personal life?
I'd love to do more traveling. I've done a lot. I had a bucket list from the time I was very young, and I've systematically gone through it. But there's still some places I'd like to go.
Like?
I'd like to go, believe it or not, to Algeria. I love archaeology, and I've done all the rest of the Mediterranean. I've done Morocco, which I'd like to go back to because I was very young when I did it. Libya, Egypt several times. I went to St. Catherine's Monastery in the Sinai Desert. I went twice. I love that monastery. It's absolutely gorgeous. And I've been to Jordan and Lebanon and Syria and the Turkish coast. I must have taken 3 weeks to drive up that coastline, seeing all the Greek archaeological sites. I've done almost everything in Greece, even your home area, Ephesus, Vasily. And I've done most of Italy. People don't realize Sicily has fantastic Greek archaeological sites. I've got one picture I took that's actually quite good of this temple that was never finished because the Carthaginians won the war. And it's actually interesting to archaeologists and architects because it's unfinished. They can understand how they were building the Greek temples. And I mean, I'm a novice at this stuff, but one of the things that impressed me was the columns had bumps on them for the ropes to pull up the stuff for the top of the building. And it was fascinating to see that.
It sounds like you've got a little bit more traveling to do.
Yeah.
What about your culture, your personal culture? How significant a role do you feel that that's played in your life, and in what areas?
A lot, and some of it you don't realize till you're much older. I always felt from the time I was very young that you had to be an active member of the community. And that's very much a part of Greek philosophy. We're all members of the polis. And to be a citizen of the polis means you have to be active in the polis. And I've always tried to do that.
Are there any heroes or people that have influenced you along the way that we could mention?
Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who's now become an icon as the notorious RBG. In fact, she has a t-shirt that says that on it. She's very popular with younger people because she's such a trailblazer. And my father had an enormous influence on me too. He had a very curious mind.
Was it hard for you in the 60s? I'm assuming it was. There weren't a lot of women lawyers. What was it like? Did you bond together? Did you have an organization? Did these women, the few that there were, that they come together somehow? How did you get by? How did you?
In my law school class, there were 20 women out of 300. And the boys thought we were there to either find a husband, or if we were there because we liked law, we were weird. I was there because I liked law. And there were no role models. Ruth Bader Ginsburg became the first woman on the faculty 2 years after I graduated. So there were no role models. There were teachers I liked and teachers I didn't like, and teachers whose style of teaching I liked more than others, and I was watching that. But no, there weren't role models.
I'd like to close with a final question here about how you'd like to be remembered by the community, your colleagues, and the people in the community around you in general.
I'd like to be remembered as an activist way before my time. I think I mentioned a lot of my colleagues did not understand the violence against women course, or the fact that I kept bringing up sexual harassment by faculty at Temple. We succeeded in passing the first "you can't date your student" policy in the United States at the university level. And that kind of dampened it. I don't know that it stopped at the law school, but it went further underground. In fact, there was a lot of publicity surrounding the passing of that policy. It was on television, it was in the newspapers, and I was in a crowded elevator at the law school with one of my worst harassers. And he said to me, "Marina, how do you define students?" And I said, I knew what was going on. I said, "It includes your research assistant." And the blood drained out of his face, and he got off at the wrong floor. But as I said, I think it went underground after that. I think, by and large, my students appreciated what I was doing, and I've had an influence on thousands over the years.
Wonderful. Good luck with your journey and your trip to Algiers. I hope it comes to light for you, and thank you for speaking with us today.
All right. Thank you very much. I enjoyed this.
For more information about sponsoring or viewing the interview series, visit the Greek American Heritage Society of Philadelphia online at gahsp.org.